Why was she walking alone? That's what you'd ask if you saw her that afternoon. The sun hung low and merciless, turning the base into a furnace of concrete and regret. The air tasted of diesel and ambition, thick enough to choke on. Commander Eva Rostova moved through it like she was made of something the heat couldn't touch. Her boots didn't announce her. They whispered. Each step measured, deliberate, the kind of movement you perfect when silence becomes survival. She carried a data pad in her left hand, screen dark, no messages lighting it up, no urgent calls pulling at her attention, just her and the 50 meters between where she stood and where she needed to be. The dining facility. Mundane, forgettable, except for what happened on the way there. Against a concrete pillar, 3 men waited. They didn't know they were waiting. They thought they were just killing time, soaking up the post-training lull when exhaustion makes everyone a little meaner, a little bolder. Sergeant Miller owned that space the way a boulder owns a stream, big enough to redirect the flow. Specialist Drake, all sharp edges and sharper tongue, leaned against the pillar like he'd been born sneering. Corporal Finch, the youngest, practiced his cruelty in their shadow. They smelled like gunpowder and sweat, and the particular arrogance of men who'd spent the afternoon proving themselves to each other. Their laughter cut through the dead air, loud, intentional, the kind that stakes a claim. Eva saw them. Of course she saw them, she saw everything. That's what they trained her to do, observe, calculate, move forward. Her expression didn't change, didn't harden, didn't soften. She was a stone dropped into still water, creating no ripples at all. Drake noticed her first. He always did. His eyes tracked movement the way a predator tracks prey, except he'd never actually hunted anything more dangerous than his own boredom. He nudged Miller with an elbow. "Check it out, Sarge." Another officer slumming it with the grunts for chow. Miller's gaze swept over her. He saw the silver oak leaf, commander, but nothing else registered. No battalion crest. No squadron patch he recognized. She was signals intelligence, the black box, the place where nerds played with radios and called it work. To him she was average height, compact build, the kind of frame his infantry-trained eyes dismissed before his brain even finished processing the data. Non-threatening. That's what his assessment concluded. Her silence confirmed it. She didn't react, didn't acknowledge them. To Miller, that meant one thing: weakness. "Looks like one of the spooks from the SIF," he grunted, loud enough for half the walkway to hear, loud enough to make it clear this was performance, not conversation. "Probably gets lost if her GPS goes out." Finch snickered on cue. "Hey, Commander, you need an escort. It's a dangerous walk to the salad bar." Eva's pace didn't alter. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead, not through them, not past them, simply forward toward the goal, the destination, the mission. Walking. That's all this was supposed to be, walking to get food. And yet, they saw it as invitation. Her silence, her steady stride, her refusal to engage. To them it was fear wearing a uniform. It was weakness dressed up as discipline. They saw a target, not a professional, not a person, a target. As she drew level with them, Miller shifted his weight. One small step. That's all it took. He planted himself directly in her path, arms crossed over his chest, blocking the concrete walkway like a toll gate. The move was older than basic training, older than the uniform, schoolyard dominance. Force her to stop or walk around. Make her choose to acknowledge you. She stopped. Her body didn't tense. Her shoulders didn't rise, her jaw didn't tighten. She simply stopped. And then she looked, not at Miller's face, at the space to his left, the most efficient path forward, the solution to this problem. "Something we can help you with, Commander." Miller's voice dripped with mock courtesy. The word commander stretched out, coded in contempt. He was playing to his audience now. A couple of privates hurrying past. A lieutenant who suddenly found his phone very interesting. Witnesses who would later claim they saw nothing. "I need to pass," Eva said. Her voice was calm, conversational, the kind of tone you'd use to order coffee or report a malfunction in equipment. Flat, professional, impossible to weaponize. It was like dropping a stone into a fire and expecting it to burn. It baffled him. Where was the outrage, the offense, the reaction that would justify what came next? Drake stepped up beside Miller, crowding her. Two walls now instead of one. See, the thing is, we're conducting a very important walkway integrity inspection. For safety. He grinned. Too many teeth, too much performance. Got to make sure officers like you don't trip and spill your kale juice. Finch completed the triangle, moving to her right, boxing her in. 3 soldiers, 1 officer, an audience pretending not to watch. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of what they thought was happening. But Eva wasn't afraid. She was observing. Her gaze lifted slowly, deliberately, moving past Finch's eager face, past Drake's performance, settling for just a moment on Miller's flushed features. Then higher, past their heads entirely, to the 2 black dome cameras mounted under the eaves of the adjacent building. Camera A7 and A8. She noted their fields of view, the angles, the lack of obstructions. Everything they were doing was being recorded in high definition. Her eyes returned to Miller. The inspection is complete, she stated, not a request, a fact. Move. The quiet authority in that single word stunned them. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear masked as aggression. It was procedural, clinical, like she just informed them their equipment failed inspection and needed to be repaired. Miller's face went from red to crimson. He was a sergeant, a leader of men. Men respected him, feared him maybe, and this quiet, unimposing officer was dismissing him like faulty machinery. "You got a real attitude problem, you know that?" he snarled, stepping closer, invading her space. "Maybe you need to learn some respect for the guys who do the real work around here." Eva didn't step back, didn't step forward, simply held her ground. The data pad hung loosely in her left hand. Her right hand, empty, relaxed at her side. No tension in her shoulders, no clenching of her fists, no visible preparation for conflict, just profound, unsettling stillness. She had absorbed it all, the verbal assault, the physical posturing, the public humiliation. She'd absorbed it and processed it the same way she processed signals in the operations center, as data, information to be documented, analyzed, acted upon. The incident was now captured by multiple sensors, time-stamped, geolocated, witnessed by 24 electronic eyes that never blinked, never forgot, never lied. She had what she needed. Without another word, Eva took one precise step to her left. She flowed around the edge of Miller's bulk with an economy of motion that seemed almost liquid. She didn't brush against him, didn't rush. Before they could react, she was past them, continuing toward the dining facility, her pace exactly as steady as before, as if nothing had happened, as if they were weather, inconvenient, temporary, ultimately irrelevant. Drake started to say something, a fresh insult forming on his lips, but Miller raised a hand to stop him. The sergeant watched her retreating back, confusion and anger knotting in his gut. Her refusal to be provoked was more infuriating than any curse or threat could have been. She denied him even the satisfaction of her fear. "Let her go," he growled, more to himself than to his men. "The little spook just wrote a check her body can't cash." He spat on the concrete, a final gesture of contempt. They watched until she disappeared inside the building, a silent figure merging with the architecture. They thought they had won. They mistook her silence for surrender. They had no idea what they'd just started. What they didn't know could fill a hangar. What do you do when the system fails you? That's the question no one asks until they're standing in it. Eva's quarters were a study in function over comfort. Military-issue furniture, pale gray walls, no photographs, no souvenirs, nothing that whispered of a life outside the mission. On a workbench against one wall, a Poseidon SC7 rebreather lay disassembled, its components arranged on a black non-static mat in precise, almost surgical order. To most people, it would look like chaos. To her, it was meditation. Every piece had a purpose. Every connection mattered. One weak seal could kill you at depth. She understood systems, how they worked, how they failed, how to fix them when they broke. On the desk beside the workbench sat a single personal item in a simple black frame, not a photograph, an embroidered patch, A stylized phoenix, its wings crafted from golden circuit traces, rising from a bed of dark radio waves. Beneath it, woven in silver thread, a Latin motto, Fides Antennae, faith in the antenna, the emblem of a signals intelligence unit she'd once belonged to, a unit that specialized in finding order in chaos, signals in noise, truth in lies. She placed the data pad on the desk but didn't sit. Instead, she walked to the small window and looked out at the manicured lawn, her eyes unfocused. She wasn't seeing the grass or the buildings. She was replaying the encounter, not the words, not the feelings, the data points. Time 16:42 hours. Location, grid coordinate 48 SUG 8374957288. Subjects, 3 enlisted personnel. Sergeant Miller E5, Specialist Drake E4, Corporal Finch E4, witnesses multiple. Camera coverage confirmed, cameras A7 and A8. Audio, probable but not confirmed. Physical contact, none initiated by her. Verbal engagement, minimal, professional, non-escalatory. The encounter replayed in her mind like footage on a loop. Clean, clinical, no emotion clouding the facts. She knew what would happen next. She'd seen this pattern before. Men like Miller didn't stop at verbal harassment. They escalated. They tested boundaries until something broke. Usually it was the other person who broke. They'd gotten away with it before. That's why they kept doing it. But Eva didn't break. She bent, maybe, absorbed force, redirected it, but breaking. That required weakness. And weakness was something she'd trained out of herself years ago, one repetition at a time, one controlled breath at a time, one mission at a time. She sat at the desk and opened the data pad. The screen glowed to life, casting pale blue light across her face. Her fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency. She pulled up the base's internal security system. Most personnel didn't even know it existed. Most didn't have clearance to access it. But Signals Intelligence had certain privileges, certain access. She entered her credentials and navigated to the camera archive. Camera A7, 1642 hours, download. Camera A8, 1642 hours, download. She watched the footage once, just once. The angle was good, the lighting was clear, Miller blocking her path, Drake and Finch boxing her in. Their body language aggressive, predatory, her own stillness, her calm, the space between threat and response. It was all there, documented, undeniable. She saved the files to an encrypted drive and closed the pad. Then she sat in the quiet of her room and thought about what came next. She could file a report, go through official channels, but official channels had a way of protecting their own. Miller was infantry, well liked by his peers, part of the tribe. She was Signals Intelligence, an outsider, the quiet one, the one who didn't fit. She'd seen how these things went. The investigations that went nowhere. The witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember. The subtle retaliation that followed anyone who dared to complain. The whispers in the chow hall. The ostracism. The quiet campaigns to make someone's life miserable until they requested a transfer or simply gave up. No, official channels were broken. The system had already failed her the moment Miller stepped into her path. The moment Drake crowded her space. The moment Finch completed the trap. The system had failed every time someone saw what was happening and walked faster, looked away, pretended they were somewhere else. So she would wait, she would document, and she would let them make the next move, because men like Miller always did. They couldn't help themselves. The first confrontation was never enough. They had to prove something, to themselves, to each other, to the world that kept telling them they mattered when deep down they suspected they didn't. Eva stood and walked back to the workbench. She picked up a small component from the rebreather, a pressure sensor valve, and examined it under the light. It was simple, elegant. It did exactly what it was designed to do, nothing more, nothing less. When pressure exceeded safe limits, it opened. When pressure dropped, it closed. No ego, no emotion, just function. She wished more people understood that principle. Do your job, nothing more, nothing less. Don't make it personal. Don't let your ego write checks your body can't cash. But people weren't machines. They had egos, insecurities, the need to prove themselves by pushing others down. The next evening, Eva finished her shift in the operations center and left through the rear exit. The sun had set, leaving the base bathed in the cold glow of sodium lights. She walked toward the motor pool, taking a route that passed by the maintenance hangars. It was a longer path to her quarters, but she needed the air, needed to think, needed to move. She didn't see them following her at first. They were good at staying in the shadows, moving when she moved, stopping when she stopped. Miller, Drake, and Finch. Hunting. They'd spent the day nursing their bruised egos, drinking just enough to blur the edges of good judgment, convincing each other that what they were about to do was justified. She disrespected them, embarrassed them. She needed to be taught a lesson. Eva turned toward Hangar 3, a large maintenance facility that was closed for the night. The doors were locked, but she had access. She swiped her card and slipped inside. The interior was dark except for the emergency lighting casting long shadows across tool benches and equipment. She walked to the center of the space and stopped, waiting. She'd felt them following her, heard the scuff of boots on pavement, seen the flicker of movement in her peripheral vision. She knew they were coming. That's why she'd chosen this route. That's why she'd entered the hangar, because this needed to end, officially, documentably, legally. The door opened behind her, 3 silhouettes against the orange glow of the exterior lights. Then the door closed, sealing them in darkness broken only by the red emergency exit signs. "Well, well," Miller's voice echoed in the empty space. "Look who we found. Out for a midnight stroll, Commander." Eva turned slowly. She could see them now, her eyes adjusted to the low light. Miller in the center, Drake to her left, Finch to her right, the same formation, the same tactic, except this time there was no audience, no witnesses, no one to pretend they didn't see, just 4 people in a locked hangar, and cameras. Hangar 3 had excellent camera coverage. She'd checked. "You should leave," Eva said, her voice calm, professional, the same tone as before. Drake laughed. It was an ugly sound. "You hear that? She's giving us orders now." "We're just here to talk," Miller said, moving closer. "Have a little chat about respect, about knowing your place, about understanding that you can't just walk around here like you own the base." "This is your last chance to leave," Eva said. "Walk out that door, forget this happened, go back to your barracks." "Or what?" Finch sneered, his young face twisted with borrowed courage. "You gonna call for help? Tell on us. We're just talking, Commander. Just 3 concerned NCOs checking on a lost officer." They moved closer, tightening the circle, and Eva stood in the center, still and calm, her breathing steady, her mind clear. She'd given them a chance. They'd chosen this. And now she would give them exactly what they came for, not what they expected, but what they deserved. Drake threw the first punch. 8 seconds can change everything. That's how long it took. 8 seconds from the moment Drake's fist cut through the air to the moment all 3 of them were on the ground, subdued, controlled, no longer a threat. If you'd blinked, you would have missed it. If you'd looked away, you'd never believe it happened. Drake's punch came fast. He'd thrown punches before, in bars, in training, in the controlled chaos of combatives courses where you wore pads and followed rules. This wasn't training. This was meant to hurt, to teach, to break. Eva moved, not away, not back, into it. She intercepted his arm at the wrist, redirecting the force with a circular motion that turned his momentum into a spiral. His body followed the physics. No choice. She stepped behind him, maintaining control of the joint, applying pressure to the nerve cluster at his elbow. Not enough to damage, just enough to lock the motor control. His arm went dead. His knees buckled. And in one fluid motion, she guided him down to the concrete floor, face first, arm trapped behind his back. 1 second. Miller came next. He was bigger, stronger, more experienced. He'd been in real fights. He charged forward, trying to use his mass as a weapon. Eva released Drake and shifted her weight, pivoting on her lead foot. Miller's momentum carried him past her. She caught his uniform collar and his belt, controlling his center of gravity. A small push at the right angle, a slight trip with her leg, and he went down hard, not falling, guided. She dropped with him, her knee against his back, her hand controlling his neck. Not choking, not striking, controlling. He tried to push up, but she applied pressure to a specific point behind his jaw. His arms went weak, his vision blurred. He stopped resisting. 4 seconds. Finch hesitated. He'd watched his two superiors go down like they were made of paper. Fear flooded his system. Fight or flight. He chose flight. He turned to run. Eva moved faster. She closed the distance in 3 strides, caught his arm as he reached for the door, and used his own pulling force against him. An arm bar, a pivot, a controlled takedown. He landed on his back, the air knocked out of his lungs. She pinned his arm at an angle that made resistance impossible without breaking his own joint. 8 seconds. She knelt there, breathing steady, heart rate barely elevated, surrounded by 3 fully grown soldiers who'd come to hurt her and found themselves utterly neutralized. She hadn't punched anyone, hadn't kicked, hadn't struck. Every move had been a defensive control. Minimum force necessary, maximum efficiency. Textbook. She held them there, Drake groaning on the floor, his arms still numb, Miller gasping for air, his vision swimming, Finch whimpering, his shoulder screaming at him not to move. They weren't injured, they were just done, finished, controlled. "Stay down," Eva said quietly, not a threat, an instruction. "If you move, you'll hurt yourself. I'm not doing it. Your own resistance will do it. Understand?" They understood. They had no choice but to understand. Their bodies had already learned what their egos refused to accept. They'd picked a fight they had no business starting. They'd hunted prey that turned out to be a predator. They'd mistaken silence for weakness and stillness for fear. They'd been wrong. Eva reached into her pocket with her free hand and pulled out a small radio. She keyed the mic. "Base security, this is Commander Rostova. I'm in Hangar 3. I need MPs and a supervisor. 3 individuals attempted assault. They're contained. No injuries. Send someone now." Her voice was calm, professional, like she was reporting a maintenance issue. Equipment malfunction, system failure, nothing personal, just facts. The response came through scratchy but clear. "Copy that, Commander. Units en route. ETA 3 minutes." She waited 30 seconds, a minute, 2, holding position, maintaining control. Drake tried to shift his weight. She adjusted the pressure on his nerve cluster. He stopped moving. Miller tried to speak. She increased the pressure behind his jaw slightly. He went quiet. Finch just lay there, tears running down his face, his shoulder burning. The hangar doors burst open. Flashlights, voices, military police officers flooding in, weapons drawn but lowering when they saw the scene. One woman holding 3 men, all accounted for, all controlled, no chaos, no violence, just aftermath. "Commander Rostova," the MP sergeant approached carefully, his flashlight beam finding her face. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "Negative," Eva said. "These 3 followed me into the hangar and initiated a physical assault. I defended myself using non-lethal control techniques. They're not injured, just restrained. I recommend you secure them and begin documentation. The incident is recorded on the hangar security cameras." The MP sergeant nodded. He'd seen a lot in his career. But this was new. He gestured to his team. They moved in, taking over the restraints, pulling the 3 men to their feet, securing their hands with zip ties. Drake, Miller, and Finch stood there, faces flushed with shame and anger and fear. The MP sergeant looked at Eva, then at them, then back at Eva. "We'll need your statement, ma'am." "Of course," Eva said. "I'll provide a full written report within the hour. But first, I recommend you secure the camera footage from this hangar immediately. It will show everything, every moment, every action, who initiated, who responded, it's all there." The sergeant nodded again. He was already calling it in on his radio, requesting the footage be preserved. Eva stood there, surrounded by MPs and flashing lights and 3 men who just learned a lesson they'd never forget. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel anything. Just tired. tired of the system that had forced her to this point, tired of men who thought silence meant submission, tired of having to prove over and over that she had a right to exist in her own uniform without being hunted. But she wasn't broken. She was documented, official, legal. The system had failed to protect her, so she'd protected herself. And now the system would have to answer for it. The MPs led Miller, Drake, and Finch out of the hangar. Eva followed, walking into the night air, breathing deep. It was over. This part anyway, but she knew what came next. The investigation, the hearing, the inevitable pushback, the system protecting its own. She was ready. She'd been ready her whole career. Because that's what you did when the system failed you. You documented, you prepared, you survived. And when they came for you, you gave them nothing but facts, nothing but procedure, nothing but the truth captured in high definition by cameras that never lied. Sometimes survival isn't loud. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's 8 seconds in a dark hangar where you prove that quiet doesn't mean weak, and stillness doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes survival is just doing your job. Nothing more, nothing less. Did she lie? That's what they wanted to know. That's what the hearing was supposed to determine. Except the men sitting across from her weren't asking if she lied. They were asking if she could be made to bend. If she could be pressured into a version of events that was more comfortable, more palatable, less embarrassing for everyone involved. The Article 15 hearing room was small and windowless. The air conditioning hummed constantly, making the space feel like a refrigerator for problems the command wished would just freeze and disappear. At the head of the table sat Colonel Thorne, the installation commander. 60 years old, weathered face, eyes that had seen too many of these hearings over a 30-year career. To his left, the installation's senior enlisted advisor, Command Sergeant Major Hicks, sat with his arms crossed and his expression locked in neutral. To his right, Captain Vance, the JAG officer serving as legal advisor. On the opposite side of the table sat Sergeant Miller, Specialist Drake, and Corporal Finch. Cleaned up, fresh uniforms, expressions carefully arranged into masks of injured innocence. Their company commander, Captain Reese, sat beside them like a disappointed parent at a school disciplinary meeting. Eva sat alone at the end of the table. No advocate, no representative, just her and her written statement and the truth. Colonel Thorne cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him. "Let me make sure I understand the allegations," he began, his voice gravelly from too many years of shouting over helicopters and machinery. Sergeant Miller, Specialist Drake, and Corporal Finch claim that on the evening in question, they were conducting a routine check of Hangar 3 when they encountered Commander Rostova inside. They state that she became aggressive without provocation and attacked them, using what they describe as excessive force. They claim they were defending themselves when MPs arrived. He looked up from the folder. "Is that an accurate summary of your statement, Sergeant Miller?" Miller sat up straighter. "Yes, sir, that's exactly what happened. We were just doing our jobs. She came at us out of nowhere. We had to protect ourselves." "And you're claiming self-defense?" Thorne asked. "Yes, sir, absolutely." Thorne nodded slowly. Then he turned to Eva. "Commander Rostova, you've submitted a written statement claiming that these 3 individuals harassed you earlier in the day, then followed you to Hangar 3 with the intent to assault you. You state that you defended yourself using non-lethal control techniques when they initiated physical contact. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir," Eva said, her voice steady. "That is exactly what happened." "So we have conflicting statements," Thorne said, leaning back in his chair. 3 soldiers saying one thing, one officer saying another. Without evidence, this becomes a credibility assessment. He paused. "However, Commander, I have to note that you're a signals intelligence officer. You work in an operations center. These are combat-trained infantrymen. The idea that you physically overpowered all 3 of them strains credibility." The implication hung in the air like smoke. She was lying. She had to be. because the alternative didn't fit the narrative, didn't fit what men like Thorne believed about the world and how it worked. Eva didn't react. She'd expected this. The doubt, the dismissal, the subtle suggestion that she was either exaggerating or fabricating. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Captain Vance. "Sir," she said, looking directly at Colonel Thorne, "I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Camera A7 and A8 recorded the first incident on the walkway, the entire encounter. Time-stamped, high-definition footage showing who blocked whose path, who invaded whose space, who made physical contact. It's all there." Captain Vance picked up the drive, his expression shifting from neutral to interested. "And Hangar 3, Eva continued, has comprehensive security camera coverage. The entire second incident was recorded. The tactical camera in the northeast corner has a perfect angle. It captured who entered the hangar first, who followed, who initiated physical contact, who responded. 8 seconds. That's how long the physical encounter lasted. 8 seconds from Drake throwing the first punch to all 3 individuals being controlled and awaiting security forces." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums. Miller's face drained of color. Drake stared at the table. Finch looked like he might be sick. "You have video evidence?" Thorne asked. "Yes, sir," Eva said. "Complete, unedited, high definition, time-stamped, from multiple angles. I obtained the footage legally through my security clearances and preserved it immediately. It's ready for review." Captain Vance looked at Colonel Thorne. "Sir, if I may, I'd like to view this footage before we continue." Thorne nodded. "Agreed, let's take a 15-minute recess." Captain Vance set it up. The room cleared. Eva stood and walked to the hallway, leaning against the wall. She could hear Miller and his companions in the adjacent room, their voices rising in panic and accusation. They'd lied, built their defense on the assumption that it would be their word against hers, 3 against 1, combat infantry against a signal officer. The math had seemed so simple, so certain. Except they'd forgotten about the cameras, or maybe they'd never known. Never considered that their actions were being recorded every second of every day by dozens of electronic eyes scattered across the base. Never thought that the quiet officer they'd targeted might understand systems better than they understood violence. 15 minutes later, they reconvened. Captain Vance had set up a laptop connected to a large display screen. Colonel Thorne sat forward in his chair. Command Sergeant Major Hicks uncrossed his arms. The 3 accused soldiers looked like they were sitting in front of a firing squad. "Captain Vance, you have evidence to present," Thorne said. "Yes, sir," Vance replied. "I present Exhibit A, the complete unedited recording from Hangar 3's tactical camera, time-stamped to the time of the incident." He tapped a key. The screen flickered to life. The silent high-definition footage began to play. The room watched as the 3 soldiers entered the hangar and cornered Eva. They saw the aggressive body language, the menacing way they closed in. The audio was off, but their intent was perfectly clear. The camera captured Drake throwing the first punch, and then it captured the next 8 seconds. The lie they had so carefully constructed evaporated in the stark, undeniable clarity of the video. The footage showed not a wild assault, but a controlled, almost elegant defense. It showed Eva moving with impossible economy of motion, redirecting, not striking, controlling, not injuring. It showed 3 armed soldiers initiating a confrontation and being systematically and non-lethally shut down. When the footage ended, showing Eva standing calmly over her 3 subdued attackers, the room was utterly silent. Miller's face was ashen. Drake and Finch stared at the floor, their bravado gone, replaced by the cold dread of exposure. Thorne didn't look at them. He continued to stare at the frozen image on the screen. His jaw worked. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Before I make my judgment," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I have one more individual I'd like to consult." He nodded to the door. "Send him in." The door opened, and Master Chief Petty Officer Kaido Tanaka entered. He was a legend on the base, the senior enlisted leader for the Joint Special Operations Training Group. He moved with quiet authority that commanded immediate respect. Tanaka nodded to Colonel Thorne. "Master Chief, thank you for coming," Thorne said. "You're widely regarded as this installation's foremost expert on close-quarters combat and control tactics. I've asked you here to provide your professional assessment of this footage." Captain Vance played the 8-second clip again. Tanaka watched intently, his eyes missing nothing. When it finished, he turned to Colonel Thorne. "Sir," he began, his voice a low, gravelly baritone, "what you're seeing is not an assault. It's a perfect practical application of the Tier 1 defensive control curriculum, specifically Module 7, which deals with de-escalation of a multiple assailant unarmed engagement." He gestured to the screen. "The techniques used are designed for one purpose: to establish control with minimum force necessary to end the threat while minimizing injury to the assailants. Note the use of joint locks over strikes, off-balancing pivots over direct opposition of force, targeting of nerve motor points for temporary incapacitation rather than hard targets like the head or torso." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This is not something you learn in basic training. This is a level of skill that takes years of dedicated practice to achieve. This is not a fight. It's an expert demonstration." Then he looked directly at Eva for the first time, a flicker of profound respect in his eyes. "Colonel, Commander Rostova was not just a student of this curriculum. For 2 years, she was one of its lead instructors at the Joint Special Warfare Center. She helped write the manual we use to train our most elite operators." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Miller, Drake, and Finch looked as if they'd been physically struck. The quiet signals officer they'd mocked and assaulted was in fact an expert who taught the very skills that SEALs and Delta operators used. They hadn't picked a fight with a nerd. They'd tried to mug their own professor. Colonel Thorne's gaze finally fell upon the 3 soldiers. It was cold as a winter sea. "You have not only assaulted a superior officer," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You have conspired to lie in a formal statement. You have wasted this command's time. You have brought disgrace upon your uniform and your unit. Your actions demonstrate a profound failure of character and discipline." He delivered their punishment swiftly. Reduction in rank for all 3, forfeiture of pay, 60 days of restriction and extra duty, and a permanent, career-ending letter of reprimand in their official files. Their company commander was tasked with overseeing a command-wide retraining on respect and professionalism. Then Thorne turned to Eva. The hardness in his eyes softened slightly. "Commander," he said, his voice now formal and clear, "your conduct both during the initial harassment and during the physical assault was exemplary. Your restraint and adherence to procedure are a credit to your commission and this command. The complaint against you is dismissed as baseless. This event will be expunged from your record." He paused. "You're dismissed." Eva stood, rendered a crisp salute, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. The correction was complete. What happens after justice? That's the question no one prepares you for. The hearing was over. The punishment delivered. The record corrected. Miller, Drake, and Finch would spend the next 60 days in restriction. Their careers effectively ended, their reputations destroyed. The footage of the hangar incident had circulated through the unofficial channels. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. The quiet signals officer who'd been dismissed as a nerd had systematically dismantled 3 combat-trained infantrymen in 8 seconds. But Eva didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. The days following the hearing brought a subtle but significant shift in the culture of the base. The story of Master Chief Tanaka's testimony had become the new definitive narrative. The casual arrogance that had festered in some corners of the command vanished. The sight of Commander Rostova walking to the dining facility no longer drew smirks or comments, but rather a wide berth and averted eyes. a silent acknowledgement of a power that was all the more formidable for being so quietly held. Some people nodded to her now, respectful, cautious. Others avoided her entirely as if proximity to her might somehow implicate them in the sins of Miller and his crew. The walkway where she'd been harassed was now empty whenever she passed. The dining facility quieter when she entered. She'd become something other than what she was. A symbol, a warning, a legend. She hated it. All she'd ever wanted was to do her job, to walk from point A to point B without being harassed, to eat her meals in peace, to focus on the mission. But the incident had turned her into something else, something larger, and with that came attention, questions, sideways glances, the weight of people's assumptions about who she was and what she represented. One afternoon, as Eva was leaving the Signals Intelligence facility, she saw Master Chief Tanaka waiting near the exit. He wasn't in uniform, but in civilian workout clothes. As she approached, he gave her a slow, deliberate nod. He tapped the small, subdued phoenix patch on his gym bag. Fid's antennae, faith in the antenna, the special operations version of her own emblem. It was a silent message, an acknowledgement of a shared, unspoken code of quiet competence. She returned the nod. A flicker of understanding passed between them. No words were necessary. They both understood what it meant to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to carry skill and knowledge that others couldn't see until it was demonstrated. They understood the burden of having to prove yourself again and again, not because you were inadequate, but because the world refused to believe you were capable. Tanaka turned and walked away. That was it. No long conversation, no congratulations, no war stories, just a nod, just respect. The kind that didn't need to be spoken because it was already understood. Eva continued to her quarters. Inside, she sat at her desk and looked at the framed phoenix patch on the wall. Fid's antennae, faith in the antenna. The motto had always meant something to her, but now, after everything, it meant something more. It meant trusting the signal even when others couldn't hear it. It meant believing in your own capability even when the world dismissed you. It meant holding steady in the noise and chaos and letting the truth speak for itself. She opened her data pad and checked her schedule. Tomorrow she had a briefing with the operations center. A new mission was being planned. Intelligence needed to be gathered. Signals needed to be analyzed. Patterns needed to be identified. It was the work she was trained to do, the work she was good at, the work that mattered. The incident with Miller and his crew was over, documented, resolved, filed away in the archives of base security where it would remain, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought silence was weakness and stillness was submission. But for Eva, it was just one more data point in a career full of them. One more problem solved, one more threat neutralized, one more day survived. She closed the data pad and stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the base. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Miller, Drake, and Finch were sweeping floors and scrubbing walls, their pride broken, their futures uncertain. Somewhere out there, other soldiers were telling the story of what happened in Hangar 3, embellishing it, turning it into myth. But Eva wasn't interested in myths. She was interested in missions, in signals, in the work, because at the end of the day that's all that mattered, not the recognition, not the fear, not the respect, just the work, the mission, the purpose. She had always been underestimated. She would probably always be underestimated. That was fine. Underestimation was a tactical advantage. It meant people didn't see you coming. It meant they didn't prepare. It meant when the moment came, when action was required, you had the element of surprise. And sometimes, surprise was all you needed. Surprise in 8 seconds. Surprise in training. Surprise and the absolute certainty that you were doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. Eva turned from the window and walked back to her workbench. The Poseidon SE-7 rebreather was still disassembled, still waiting. She sat down and picked up a small valve, examining it under the light. Each piece had its place. Each connection mattered. One weak seal could kill you at depth. But when everything worked together, when every component did its job, you could breathe underwater. You could survive in an environment that should kill you. You could descend into darkness and return to light. That's what discipline was. That's what training was. That's what years of practice and preparation and quiet competence gave you. The ability to survive in hostile environments. The ability to breathe when the pressure should crush you. The ability to descend into darkness and find your way back. She began reassembling the rebreather, piece by piece, connection by connection, seal by seal. It was meditative work, precise work. The kind that required focus and patience and the absolute certainty that each action mattered. It was exactly the kind of work she needed right now, because it reminded her that systems could be fixed, that broken things could be made whole, that order could be restored from chaos. The base had been broken, the system had failed, but slowly, carefully, piece by piece, it was being reassembled. Better procedures, better training, better awareness. Miller, Drake, and Finch had been removed like faulty components, and in their absence the system would function better, more smoothly, more fairly. That's what correction meant, not punishment for its own sake, but improvement, repair. The removal of the broken so the whole could function. Eva didn't take pleasure in their punishment. She didn't celebrate their downfall. She simply acknowledged that the system had identified a fault, isolated it, and made the necessary repairs. Now the system would continue. The mission would continue, and she would continue. Because that's what she did. She continued. Through harassment and assault and hearings and judgment, through doubt and dismissal and underestimation, she continued, she adapted, she overcame, not because she was special, not because she was a hero, but because she was trained, she was disciplined, she was professional. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes being professional in a world of amateurs was the most radical act of all. Where does the signal end and the operator begin? That's the question Eva asked herself in the weeks following the incident. She was back in the operations center now, fully integrated into the mission cycle, her days consumed by the silent war of information. The place she was most comfortable, the place where her skills mattered most, the place where rank and gender and physical presence dissolved into pure capability. Here, in the hushed, cool darkness of the operations center, none of that mattered. Only the signal mattered. Only the mission mattered. The air hummed with the silent power of servers and the low murmur of analysts working their stations. In the center of the room, a large holographic map depicted a contested river valley deep in hostile territory, its topographical lines glowing with ethereal light, enemy movements tracked in real time, friendly positions marked in blue, the gray zone between them, where information was incomplete and assumptions were dangerous, pulsed with uncertainty. Eva stood at her console, analyzing enemy communication patterns, looking for the ghost of a signal in a storm of electronic noise. This was the work she'd trained for, the work that had brought her to this base in the first place, before the harassment, before the assault, before the hearing, before she became a symbol. She was hunting patterns, anomalies, the digital fingerprints of an enemy who thought they were invisible. Captain Vance approached her station, his footsteps quiet on the raised flooring. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the signal's intelligence package for Operation Serpent's Coil is ready for your review. We've isolated that polymorphic frequency hopping pattern you predicted. It's exactly where your model said it would be." Eva looked up from her console, her eyes adjusting from the glow of her screen to the larger map. She absorbed the new data, her mind already several steps ahead, plotting intercepts, identifying vulnerabilities. She gave a single sharp nod of acknowledgement. The mission was the only thing that mattered now. Vance hesitated for a moment, an uncharacteristic break in his professional demeanor. "The paperwork regarding the Article 15 hearing is officially closed and sealed," he said. "Miller and his team were transferred out this morning. It's over." Eva looked from the glowing hostile terrain on the map to his face. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were clear and focused. The past was a closed loop, a system error that had been identified, documented, and purged. Her attention was already on the next task, the next problem, the next signal hidden in the noise. Correction was achieved, she said, and with that she turned back to her work, her fingers flying across the console. Her mind once again engaged in the silent, unending war of information. Vance nodded and walked away. He understood. Some people needed closure, needed to talk through trauma, needed to process and reflect and find meaning. But Eva wasn't some people. She'd already processed, already reflected, already found the only meaning that mattered. The mission continues. The work continues. You continue. She pulled up a new data stream. Enemy radio traffic, encrypted but not perfectly. There were always cracks, always patterns, always some small inefficiency in the system that revealed the human beings on the other end. Because that's what signals intelligence was really about. Not technology, not algorithms, but understanding that behind every signal was a person, and people had habits, routines, patterns. They got lazy. They got comfortable. They made mistakes. Eva's job was to find those mistakes and exploit them, to listen to the digital whispers and find the truth buried underneath, to take chaos and turn it into order, to take noise and find the signal. She worked for hours. The operations center had no windows, no sense of time passing, just the constant hum of machinery and the soft glow of screens and the quiet intensity of people working problems that could mean life or death for soldiers in the field. Around her, other analysts tracked different targets, different threats, different patterns. They were a team, but they worked in isolation, each focused on their own piece of the puzzle. At some point, someone brought her coffee. She drank it without tasting it. At some point, the shift changed. Day crew to night crew, she barely noticed. The pattern she was tracking was evolving, changing. The enemy was adapting and she needed to adapt faster. That's how this game worked. Move and countermove, signal and countersignal. An endless dance between hunter and hunted where the only certainty was uncertainty. Finally, she found it, the flaw, the crack, the small, almost imperceptible inconsistency in the frequency-hopping algorithm that revealed not just where the enemy was, but where they would be. She input the data into the tactical system and flagged it for immediate action. Within minutes, the intelligence would be passed to operational units. Within hours, those units would be moving into position. Within days, the enemy communications node would be neutralized, not because of violence, not because of force, but because someone sat in a dark room and listened to whispers in the electronic ether and found meaning where others found only noise. That was power, real power, not the loud, visible kind that drew attention and demanded recognition, but the quiet, invisible kind that changed the outcome of operations without anyone knowing you were there. The kind of power that saved lives by preventing conflict. The kind of power that won wars without firing a shot. Eva stood and stretched. Her back ached from hours of sitting. Her eyes burned from staring at screens. But her mind was clear, sharp, satisfied. She'd done her job, solved the problem, contributed to the mission. That's all she'd ever wanted, to be useful, to matter. Not because of her rank or her gender or her ability to defend herself in a hangar, but because of her skill, her expertise, her dedication to the work. She walked to the coffee station and poured another cup. The night crew was settling in, fresh analysts taking over stations, continuing the work without interruption. The mission never stopped. The enemy never slept. So neither could they, not really. You took your rest when you could in brief snatches, and then you came back and picked up where you left off. Commander, a voice behind her, she turned. It was Lieutenant Chen, one of the newer analysts, young, brilliant, still learning the nuances of the work. I wanted to thank you for what you did, for the hearing, for standing up. It changed things here, made it safer, better. Eva looked at her. Chen was 26, fresh from graduate school, one of a handful of women in the operations center. Eva saw herself in her, the same determination, the same quiet competence, the same understanding that you had to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. You don't need to thank me, Eva said. I just did my job. Still, Chen said, it mattered what you did, it mattered. Eva nodded. Then make it matter, do your work, do it well. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here. You earned your place, remember that. Chen smiled. Yes, ma'am. She walked away, back to her station, back to her screens, back to the work. And Eva stood there for a moment, coffee cup in hand, watching the operations center hum with quiet efficiency. This was her place. This was where she belonged, not in hearing rooms or hangars or administrative buildings. Here, where the signals lived, where the mission breathed, where the work never ended and the stakes were always high and the only question that mattered was, can you solve the problem? She could, she always could. That's what she'd trained for, what she'd sacrificed for, what she'd endured for. The ability to stand in the noise and find the signal, to stand in the chaos and create order, to stand in the darkness and see the light that others missed. Eva finished her coffee and returned to her console. The holographic map still glowed, the enemy still moved, the mission still waited. She logged into her terminal and pulled up the next data stream, the next problem, the next pattern to be found. Because that's what she did. She found patterns. She found truth. She found the signal in the noise. And as long as there was noise, as long as there was chaos, as long as there was a mission that needed someone who understood that silence could be strength and stillness could be power and patience could be the most devastating weapon of all, she would be here. Doing her job, nothing more, nothing less. And that was enough. That would always be enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand to be seen. It doesn't shout or boast or seek recognition. It simply exists. It simply acts. It does the right thing in the right way for the right reasons, and then it moves forward. Because the mission continues. The work continues. You continue. And in that continuation, in that quiet persistence, in that refusal to be broken or bent or made into something less than what you are, dignity finds its truest expression. Not in the hearing, not in the victory, not in the punishment of those who wronged you, but in the return to work, in the refusal to let the incident define you, in the choice to be exactly what you've always been: competent, professional, committed to the mission. That's dignity. That's strength. That's what they never understood and never would. That silence isn't weakness. That stillness isn't fear. That the quietest voice in the room might be the most powerful. That the person they underestimated might be the one who changes everything. Eva's fingers moved across the console. The data streamed. The pattern emerged. The signal revealed itself. And she was there, waiting, ready, exactly where she needed to be. Faith in the antenna. Faith in the signal, faith in the work, faith in yourself when no one else will. Sometimes that's all you need: faith and 8 seconds, and the absolute certainty that when the moment comes, you'll be ready. You'll do what needs to be done. You'll survive. You'll prevail. Not because you're the loudest or the strongest or the most visible, but because you're the most prepared, the most disciplined, the most committed to the work. And in the end, when all the noise fades and all the chaos settles and all the stories are told, what remains is this: you did your job. You did it well. You did it with dignity, and the mission continued. That's enough. That will always be enough.